Connie. Welcome to the Genetic Genius podcast. I am so thrilled to have you as a guest today. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lulu. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. We're going to have such a fun conversation talking about decluttering your life. And before we dive into that, I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your background story, what you're doing in the world, and what your impact on the planet is. Just a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Switzerland and I live now in Vancouver, Canada. And growing up in Switzerland, I was lucky enough to have my own room, but it was like a broom closet. And early on, I always realized that the environment has kind of an effect on us. So that's where I always say, like, I was constantly rearranging everything when I was growing up, but nobody could understand. They all thought I was a little weird. It's like, yeah, back then that was not such a thing. And so I also grew up like I moved from the city to the country, and the people thought the city people were weird. So I was not really accepted so much. So I spent a lot of time alone. So that's where my love for the nature comes from. I grew up just on the edge of the woods in Switzerland. So I was a lot in the woods. I would talk with trees, plants, and animals more than with friends. But I also was always a little bit of a wild child. And yeah, so that's how I grew up. But then I got tamed and I started a career in finance, ended up in corporate, and it had nothing to do with nature or energy or anything. No, it's like I grew up in a family where that was not really, like, they all thought that was just all weird woo-woo, and we're not doing this. So like a good girl, I followed that path, and today I'm saying, like, it wasn't wrong. Like, I'm really good with numbers, which helps me now a lot too with other things I'm doing. But so I ended up in finance, but then there too, like, I just can't help myself. I realized how it helps when you actually have an organized desk, how much more productive you can work, how much more on top of your work you are, how much more empowered you feel. The downside is you get a lot of work because most people can't keep up with their work. So it all ends up kind of on your desk. So this is a little bit what happened. And my freedom-loving self couldn't do too long in corporate. So I became a consultant. So then I was a consultant for a while in corporate. And then when I moved to Canada, all of a sudden, my finance degrees didn't count anymore. So it was all like, okay, you have to start from zero again if you want to work in finance. And I thought, I don't love finance that much that I'm basically starting from zero. And so, yeah, so since I'm living here, I'm more multifaceted. I help people declutter and get organized. I'm an astrologer. That's the newest thing that I added to it. Even though I was always interested in astrology, it was also one of these woo-woo things that were, no, we're not talking about stuff like that, Connie. So this came out now. I'm also into permaculture. So I have a degree from the University of Oregon in permaculture design. So I'm very much into nature. And then I figured out I just combine it all. So now, and kind of like I'm helping people get organized and create order in their environment with some principles from permaculture. I use astrology when I'm talking with clients or when I'm working with them. And yeah, so it opens up more and more. And I feel like I live more myself and my authentic self than I did in finance, even though I was really good in finance. Like they wanted to keep me, and I love doing it too. I just can't really deal with the corporate environment and all this sitting in the office for 8 hours straight or 12 more, like,
Right.
So yeah, so that's a little bit about me in a
That's
nutshell.
Yeah, that's great, Connie. I love that, you just kind of started out from this nature, kind of natural perspective, and then you've kind of come full circled back
Yeah.
around to it, and I love that you're embracing different things, which we're going to talk about. And I love Vancouver. I've been there. I haven't been there in a while, but it's a beautiful city. Just love it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
miss the ocean on the West Coast. It's different than the East Coast.
Yes, it is. I used to live for 2 years on the East Coast on the Atlantic, and it definitely is a different atmosphere on the
Mhm.
East Coast and on the Atlantic than here on the West Coast. When I came here in 96 to Vancouver the very first time, I felt at home right away. So I can't tell you why, but somehow it's really beautiful here.
It is. Love
And
it.
yeah, the ocean adds to the atmosphere, and of course the mountains is like it's a very special place. Totally.
Yeah. Oh, I can see why you would love the nature for sure. And let's dive in and talk a little bit about what you really, are embracing in your life and helping people with. Is that kind of like decluttering? And if we could kind of start, let's like clear the way and start with the clutter. And let's talk about the physical environment first. I know you kind of mentioned that a little bit, but how does clutter like impact our physical environment? Just like what's around us?
Yeah, so we can go into the woo, but they more and more also prove it in science,
Mm-hmm.
like that we are energetically connected to everything that is around us. And our home is basically a representation of us. And I think it was Winston Churchill who said that many years ago already too. It's like the house influences you and you influence the house and we influence the environment. And a lot of people kind of still dismiss this a little bit as woo-woo, but it's not true. Like we also know it. Like you can just go into an attic, you know exactly, you feel completely different in an attic.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that there is something like stuck energy and dusty and so the what we surround ourselves with either supports us or it sabotages us in a way,
Mm-hmm.
no? And if you have too much chaos around you, then that uses up a lot of brain space, a lot of just a lot of energy, and you may not even feel it because we're kind of like we're really special creatures. We can get used to a lot, and so it's like
Mm-hmm.
that ugly example of the frog who gets boiled in the water or whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting so used to it, we don't even know how amazing and full of energy we could feel if all these things wouldn't pull on us. And this is basically what the environment does to us. And you can try this out by decluttering a little bit. And most people report, oh, I feel so much lighter. I feel like a weight fell off of me.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you feel it a little bit. And then, of course, with all this energy draw and this weight on us, it stresses us out. And that's where I'm saying science can prove that. I think it was Stanford that had a study, and I had it written down. There's several universities that did studies on it, how our household items stress us out the more we
Mm-hmm.
have. It's also crazy that in the last 50 years, we have, I think, 5 times bigger houses or something crazy like that. And back 50 years ago, we used to have so many items, and now we have 10 times more items. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's really a way how you can, without having to take medication, going to doctors or anything, you can reduce your stress level by
Mm-hmm.
just changing your environment and decluttering. And this is why I'm saying decluttering is self-love, because you do it for yourself and for your well-being. And I could
Yeah.
talk about this for 3 hours. I get very passionate about it.
Well, good. I'm glad we have some good time. Yeah. So I really like what you said about, you don't always notice in your environment what is like toxic in changing your space and how you react and relate to your environment. We get, like you said, so used to it. We are fabulous creatures. We're able to adapt, but then
Yeah.
is it, are we adapting in a way which we could actually be more clear, have more clarity if we move some things out of the way.
Yeah.
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 And so I like how you also mentioned the brain. So let's talk a little bit about the brain, because of course, I want to talk a little science and fun here. So how does the clutter or the decluttering come into play when we discuss like the mind and the brain? Because we talk, our brain is also can be filled with clutter, right? And
Yeah.
so, like AKA like a brain dump. Like, how does that work in when we're talking about cluttering or decluttering?
Decluttering the brain. Yeah. So I want to first say I'm no doctor, I'm no scientist, I'm no nothing. I'm just passionate about this topic. So I'm reading up on stuff like this as good as I can understand it without this medical background. But yeah, so I always say clutter starts in the head. So it starts and it kind of ends in the head. And when you start decluttering your brain and your head, it has so many positive effects. And so where I say it starts with clutter starts with mental clutter is because we think a certain way, and that's why we have all this physical clutter around us. And then we think a certain way, that's why we can't get rid of the stuff around us,
Right. Like a bad loop.
It's really a bad loop. And what is also entangled in this bad loop is emotional clutter, which we don't want to feel bad feelings. So we're pushing them down too. So then it becomes even more and more. And so, yeah, you mentioned the brain dump. And so this is something that I struggle with too, with mental clutter. And I think a lot of people do. And we don't even understand that we actually can do something about it. So brain dumps is like just get this stuff out and also look at it, whether it's really true or not. So I find that a lot of people have beliefs in their head, which I call mental clutter, that they actually don't really agree with, but they can't come from childhood, or they come from how they were taught in school or wherever. Like when we're growing up, we're so impressionable. So it depends how we're growing up. We may have certain beliefs, and if we never question them, then we just think they're facts, they're the law or whatever.
Right.
And then they may limit us. They may limit us in what we want to do. They, like me, like I was the perfect example. Like, yes, back then when going into the work career, there was no decluttering back then. It was not really a thing yet, or it wasn't, all these more soft professions didn't exist. But I was not even talking about it. I was like back at home in the closet studying and reading, and I wasn't talking about it. So that is one of the mental clutters. And I needed a lot of work to be brave enough to say it. Yes, I'm interested in astrology. I studied astrology. I can help with an astrology reading. I can help with energy work to a degree. I'm not an energy healer, but I know how items, physical items, mental items, emotional clutter affects you and how you can release it. And so many people struggle with this. So yeah, you can start decluttering that, but it's a tough task. I don't know about you, but it is a tough task. I always say
Right.
that mental clutter is probably one of the toughest tasks to declutter.
Right. Yeah. It's not like you can just clean up your desk. It's not just quite as easy.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when we're in that space of, decluttering our brain, and then you mentioned the cluttered environment and kind of the emotional impact. So I'd love for us to kind of like talk a little bit, because stress has been so huge over the past 15 months or so with the pandemic. And how does that then cluttered environment? So we have this physical environment that might be impacting our brain, or our brain might be impacting the environment, right? And so how does right, both, how does that then turn and create a certain level of stress that impacts, our emotional ability to deal with the stress, or vice versa?
Yeah, well, we get more and more stressed out, no? And then you feel it in your body, like our body reacts. Our body is not separate from our brain, so the
Right.
body reacts. So you may, and I'm not saying decluttering heals you, but if you have a lot of clutter, you may experience health issues too because of it. We don't learn how to deal with emotions. At least I didn't learn it when I grew up. Like my parents didn't know. I'm sure they didn't know. Otherwise, they would have taught me in school. I wasn't taught. So we're kind of like, we don't know how to deal with it. So when we're all stressed, what we're trying to do is push it away, pushing on. That's also kind of like how I grew up. Okay, don't show any weakness, just push on. And so we're stuffing it down. And it becomes worse and worse, that like it can end in burnout. It can end, you're probably more the expert in that field where it all can end, but it can end in some pretty life altering or interfering issues in your life. No, and dealing with emotional clutter, like one of the big things that I see when I help people with clutter is grief. We don't learn how to deal with grief either. And oftentimes when people are struggling with physical clutter in their home, they're dealing with some kind of grief. And grief is not just when you lose a loved one. Grief can be because they maybe lost a job, or maybe they had to move. Maybe they even wanted to move, but you're still grieving the old place to a degree. You know, you don't know how to work with this. So you're trying to soothe yourself. And instead of soothing yourself in a way that actually helps you physically and emotionally and mentally, they may go shopping. Others go and eat. Others go and are more destructive and drink or smoke or take drugs. And so this is how it affects too. Like we have this joke about retail therapy, no? Like if we're upset, if we're emotionally upset or stressed, we may go and buy something, even though we don't need it, even though we can't afford it. We go and buy something, and then it ends up like clutter at home, because it's not really something we wanted. It's not something we needed. It's just to fulfill a need short term, and then long term it has no effect. But then the item is in your home, if it was an item, like women a lot with clothes or shoes, and then it's here, and then when you're not dealing with it afterwards either, it just starts to pile up, and there comes a time when it kind of like tips over, and then it becomes so overwhelming that you don't even know how to start. So then you have emotional clutter from the clutter, like a little bit a vicious cycle sometimes.
Yeah, and you're right. We have so many different vices that we use to, we think we're helping with our stress level or our emotions, but then we're actually can be contributing to them, right? In a negative, impactful way. Sometimes it can be a positive way, but yeah, shopping is definitely something that people will do as a vice to help sometimes suppress the emotions that really need to be expressed.
Yeah, but we never learned to express emotions. And if you grew up like me, we were not encouraged or supposed to show emotions either. It's like, I mean, I think here in America, it's a little bit more okay to be emotional. But in Switzerland, it was more like, you don't show emotions, that's showing weakness, and that's very unprofessional too. And this is, you don't want the neighbor to know that maybe you're not doing good or something. So
yeah,
I was really taught to shove it down. So this is where I sometimes still struggle with clutter, like emotional and mental. That's why I'm so passionate about it.
yeah.
Less with physical clutter, because I do kind of feel the effect of too much chaos. But then we can have chaos in our head, we can have chaos in our body. So
Yeah.
it's just finding the way how to really deal with it, instead of just dealing with the effect. Actually go to the root cause and find it there,
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Why are you having the excess emotional clutter or excess emotional baggage, right, that you're carrying along with you, helping you to not have the clarity that you need to move forward? So true.
Yeah.
What's the kind of difference between a clutter and a hoarding? Is there some kind of, because I don't know. Is there a difference between those two?
Yeah, there's totally one. So I don't know 100% the percentage, but hoarding, I think, is only 2, maybe 3% of the populations are real hoarders. It's actually a real diagnosis. And somebody would need psychological help. So you can't just say, oh yeah, you just start decluttering your home. They need way more help. So this is the difference. Now, this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, because a lot of people jokingly say, oh, I'm a hoarder. And I feel this is diminishing the people who actually really have this how you say properly, disease or sickness.
Right. Dysfunction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So there is definitely a difference. So if you are a hoarder, there's a spectrum too, but and if
Mm-hmm.
you are a hoarder, your home is so full with things that you can't use rooms anymore. Like they're
Right.
so packed full that you can't even get in there anymore. You maybe saw photos, like sometimes they're getting exposed on TV, which must be very traumatic for these poor people.
Right.
With their house full, and like literally you may have a small little pathway to go from the bed to the sink. Maybe they can still use the kitchen, most of the time not. So that is a real hoarder.
Yeah.
Anything else, so at least 97% of the population can't get away with saying they're hoarders.
Right.
They're just struggling with letting go of items that they don't need anymore. And that's where I can help. But it's of course not something that happens overnight. That's also
Mm-hmm.
something that people want. They want then
Right. Instantaneous. Everything needs to be instantaneous.
not realizing that they couldn't handle it.
Right.
If I could provide it for them, they couldn't handle it. And that's the other thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So no, there's totally a difference between
Mm.
it. And I always say, like, I would only be able to help a hoarder if she or he or they were in psychological
Counseling.
treatment, and I would work together with their therapist, because that's not, it's literally, it's like if I would not be a doctor and try to heal somebody. It's
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for clearing that up, Connie, because I think I loved what you said about, we need to use the correct terminology and not jokingly make fun of people that are in the need of serious help,
Yes.
and it's important. So I appreciate that clarification for our listeners. That was great. Let's talk about one of your favorite things, I think, to talk about is the the emotional perspective of decluttering, like from that self-love piece. So I'd love for you to talk about, you mentioned it earlier. And so we're talking about, how when we declutter our environment, how that can create more self-love. And I'd love for you to talk about what that means, how you work with that and incorporating it not only with your clients, but also into your personal life, where creating more love with yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I also struggled with self-love.
Right. We always struggle. That's how we teach people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this is just take a short detour. This is not something that most people realize is clutter. When
Mm.
you're struggling with like self-love or mental issues or emotional issues, this is also clutter, which then could have effect onto your physical environment. And I say that decluttering is self-love because most people see in self-love or self-care, they see, oh, I go and buy me a beautiful dress, or I go to the spa, or I go and get a facial, or I paint my toenails fancy, or whatever. And those are all great. I'm not saying I'm not doing those. Those are all great. But when you then come home with your beautiful new face and the fancy nails, and you come home into like a chaotic, cluttered environment, just pay attention how you feel. Like when you come into your home, how your energy drops, and how you then, everything needs so much more effort to do. Like, and oftentimes we don't end up doing the things because it would need too much energy to do. So then
Right.
we maybe don't eat healthy. Like, so that's one of the things. We may not eat healthy because that would require that we went grocery shopping, which we couldn't do because we were so emotionally and mentally exhausted that we couldn't do it. So then we ordering pizza in, although side note, pizza is my favorite food. So, but it depends. Like you can't just eat pizza, no? So,
Right.
but so you may not eat healthy. You may sit all night in front of the TV, even though you wanted to go for a walk with your friend. You just don't have the energy for it. And then because you don't have the energy for it, maybe your health declines. Your mental health may also more decline. And this is why I'm saying decluttering is self-love, because if you make sure that your environment supports you, and I want to say too, it's like, it's not about being a minimalist or only having a certain amount of items in your home. It's about how you feel in your home. How does your home make you feel when you come in? Does it hug you and say, oh, hello, Connie, welcome back home. This is your sanctuary. Or does it stress you out? And so this is where this saying comes from. If you're creating an environment at home that supports you, then that is self-love, because it reduces your stress, which has the ripple effect that I just talked about. And now, especially during the pandemic, when we all were forced to stay at home. Before, a lot of people who had a messy home could escape into their organized
Right.
workplace, you know,
Go to work and escape or wherever.
and escape or escape to go do social events and stuff. And all of a sudden we were all forced to stay home. And I do know that a few people started realizing that their home is actually making them sluggish and heavy and stressed out and everything. And then they don't know where to start. And then they may start beating themselves up, but they have never learned it. And then the beating yourself up is again mental clutter, which creates emotional clutter. And then we're back in this
bad loop again.
And somewhere we have to put a wedge in and start
Right.
To change something for our own sake, for self-love. And the more you do it, the more you actually realize too that you are worth it. So like, for example, I saw this article the other day in some publication, big fancy publication. They said, oh, how can you get your home ready so for guests to come back in, you need to, you know? And I'm always, that's another little pet peeve of mine. Why make your home only presentable for guests that come in? You want to have your home, you're there most
all
of
the time.
for you, no, not for the guest. Like, yes, of course, we don't want to invite them into a home that is completely out of out of order and everything. But it's not about the guest only, it's mainly about you. So
Oh yeah, that's a really key important piece to have your environment. One, I think, you said about like reflecting you, what you coming home to your safe place or your haven. And then also, make it a joy for yourself when you love to come home, or be in your space. And that's exactly how I treat my environment, and not only in the inside, but also in the outside, where we have our gardens, like you mentioned permaculture earlier. You want that outside environment. For me, I would want to be just as happy to sit on my porch and have it be, clean for the energy to move through as when I'm in my office by me. And I totally agree. That's a really important point that you made there.
Yeah, and it's totally individual. Like you can feel it. Nobody can tell you how you should live. Should is anyways always a word that tells you, okay, you're kind of like on somebody else's terms or somebody else's values, So just listen in, become aware, become aware how it feels. Like when people start doing this, they notice automatically what's not working or what's too much or where it's, it's like that's why I'm always saying, like, who am I to say how many items you can have? But if your home makes you stressed out and aggravated, then start looking why and start changing things.
Yeah, that's so true. What do you do if, like, let's say for instance, you're starting to declutter your house, or maybe you're already, in the process, but you have a partner or a family member who then is not into decluttering, or also maybe he's a little messy, whatever that would be. How do you swim that environment in between to make it a non-chaotic and symbiotic relationship?
Yeah. And interestingly, oftentimes very organized people end up with kind of like some clutter box.
Right.
So it's a question I get a lot. And the answer most people don't like to hear too much. But you have to focus on yourself and your own things. So you can't really change anybody else. Nagging for sure creates the opposite result.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. And so you have to figure out your own stuff first. You have to look after your own things first. Oftentimes, if you just look after yourself, make sure that whatever you are Like maybe you have your own room, or you have your own office, or your own desk, or you are the one who usually cooks and you're in the kitchen, or whatever it is. If you start there, oftentimes I always say, like, it's contagious. Like these days, it's
Right.
maybe not such a good word anymore. Decluttering is contagious. If you're not nagging, all of a sudden the other person may start to, maybe not the way you would want them to. So
Right.
again, that's, you have to leave it up to them. So, but first start with yourself. And then the other thing is, like, if you're in a relationship and you're really committed to each other and committed to each other's growth and well-being, then you can most likely create compromises around how the shared spaces in the home need to look for both to feel comfortable, you know. So
Right.
it's yeah, it's a point, it's the discussion point to learn about the other person too. Is mine, we may learn, the other person may learn all of a sudden about themselves, certain things they didn't know, and you may learn about yourself. You may learn about more about the other person. But again, it is hard. It is hard, but I think it doesn't matter whether you're far away on the spectrum or not so far away. We always think we know how the other person should act or what the other person should do, no? And it's not true, no? So we have to start with ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you know, we can't necessarily change others. You're so right. We have to be the example, you know, and for my husband and myself, I give him his own room to be like, you know, it's his closet. I'm like, okay, this is your closet. You know, if you want it to be however you want it to be, I'm not going to do anything in it because I'm very clean. And so for that, it was a really good, like, kind of like compromise, you know, then and then I just go in and I help in the closet every once in a while, like, okay, like what's going on in here?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, but I think freedom is, like you said, not having that kind of like nagging perspective and having that freedom to let the other person, because maybe they were brought up a certain way to think things are, and, but when you're set that example and you create the environment, which is, you know, so key, then that really can help the other person to see, oh, it's nice and clean in here or whatever.
Yeah. And nagging, we all know it for ourselves. No, like if somebody nags us about something, how do you
Right.
start to feel? Like, again, how do you feel? You feel either, if you're me, you feel rebellious, then, you know,
Right. Yeah. You're like,
even if
I'm just
you
going to
would
make it
want to,
messier.
yeah, exactly. Even if you would want to clean up, you don't, because just
Right.
because, you know, or you feel really annoyed, and it just affects the relationship, no matter whether that's with your spouse or with your children or anything. Like,
Yeah.
and there is where I'm saying, like, if there is really love and mutual respect, you can talk about it, and you can go and say, listen, this is how it makes me feel when whatever, you know, can we find a way how we can come up with some agreement, how we could
Right.
deal with this, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great. You know, you, like you said, when we have that loving relationship, it's easier for us to help each other out in a way that supports the other person, which is really key for growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted you to talk about is, so when we're going through, say we're like, okay, I'm ready to start decluttering my environment. But then, you know, like, oh my gosh, I'm so overwhelmed. There's so much stuff around me that I don't even know where to start, you know, and then the idea of even decluttering makes me more overwhelmed, which is like super common for a lot of my patients, right? In that anxiety state. Like, so where do you begin? Like, where's the first step? If you could walk the listeners through kind of like, okay, like you're feeling overwhelmed. What are some of those first steps? Just like jumpstart into dive off the diving board into the mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there are several ways how you can start. One very important one is, again, we start with the brain. We start realizing that this didn't happen overnight, so it will not change overnight. And again, you probably couldn't handle it if it would be
Right.
completely different overnight. So this is going to be a process. I always say, like, decluttering is a journey. It's not a one-time event. So that being said, one of my sayings, and I just got reminded the other day by a coaching client that I still don't say it enough, even though I feel like I'm a broken record. I always say, like, a few minutes a day keeps the chaos away. So what we want to do is we want to find little pockets of time in our day where we can just go and straighten some things out. Because because most people, when they are so done and want to declutter, what happens often is they take on too much. So they think, okay, now this weekend I'm gonna declutter. And then they start ripping everything out, making a huge thing. And I don't know how long, like that's individual, but maybe an hour in, 2 hours in, they're getting completely exhausted.
Right.
Because when you're starting to mess with all this, a lot of energy gets swirled up, dust make really physical dust and mold get into your system. You're also not used to dealing with all this stuff. You have absolutely no decluttering muscle. How I always say, like, you need to train your decluttering muscle first before you can just go on and declutter for hours. And then what happens then is like in the middle of, like, after 2 hours or however long they manage to push through, they stand in a huge chaos that's even bigger than before. They're completely exhausted. Then they start beating themselves up. I knew it. I can't do it. My mother was always right that and you know, and then nothing happens anymore. So I always say, like, start very small and start training your clutter muscle. So you can start with as little as 15 minutes a day.
15.
Yeah, or you can do 5. You can do it while the kettle boils, while the coffee brews. You can do all kinds of stuff. Start really small. That's the first thing. You can set a timer, or you can tell yourself, I'm going to declutter 5 things, or I'm going to declutter 10 things, or whatever, like just really small. And the second thing that is also very important, don't go and try to do the things that you have the most emotional attachment to, like that are going to be the most difficult ones. Go with the, I say, low-hanging fruit, or with the easy things, or with the things that you know already. Like I always joke too and say, people know exactly where their clutter is. They know exactly what they don't want anymore. They just haven't done anything about it yet. So go first and take care of those things that don't need a lot of brain space to decide, because that's another thing that we first have to get used to, that, okay, then we come across all these items and we have to make decisions, and decision fatigue is a thing. So you don't want to go and deal with your grandmother's china as the first item that you're deciding whether it has to go or not. It's go with, I always say, like, you for sure find something that has nothing, like no business to be in your home anymore. Start with those, and just low hanging fruit, low on emotional scale. You don't really care about it. So
yeah, that's great advice. I love that, because it's so true. If you start on some massive task, you're just gonna cop out, and like you said, you're gonna feel like you were a failure, which is not helpful when you're trying to declutter your emotional and physical space, mental space.
And you can think about it. You wouldn't go out and decide, oh, I want to run a marathon, and then the next day you would run 30 miles or something. No? Like
to train for it.
We all would understand that we probably would have to build up our shape a little bit. And it's the same here. And yes, decluttering can be exhausting. It can be emotionally exhausting, mentally exhausting, physically exhausting, but we can work up to it. And if we know how to deal with it, and the way you know whether you did just enough or not too much is when you feel actually good after decluttering rather than exhausted. So if you feel good, or you feel lighter, like I said earlier, a lot of people say, I feel so much lighter, I feel so much better. Some people say I can breathe all of a sudden better. If you feel like this, then that's the right amount, and just go on with this rather than trying to do too much and be exhausted and crash and then not do anything for months or weeks, or
then it goes back to square one again.
or maybe even worse,
that's super great advice. And my husband and I, we're going on this backpacking trip in 2 weeks for our anniversary. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get out all the like backpacking food and sort through it. So I did that last night, and I was, every single piece was expired. And I was like, why have we been hanging on? It was this massive box of food, but it was something really easy for me to do because I just sat on the couch and I like went through it. You know, I had watched the Olympics and I went through the things but I felt so much better afterwards. Like there was a whole empty box and I was like, oh, that was super easy for me to do. And I had no idea that I had this whole box of expired camping food in the closet.
Yeah, and a lot of people have no idea how much stuff they do actually have, because that's another thing that brain science can prove, that actually our brain is able to block all this stuff out, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to function anymore. It
Right.
needs a lot of energy to block the stuff out, but it can block it out. So then people don't even know how much stuff they're having, like, because
Right.
they're so used to seeing their home that they don't even see it. That's why I say sometimes it's helpful you take a photo and then you look at that photo as if it wouldn't be your home, like you all of a sudden see it better. And yeah, you can, that's a good example too, when you can, while you watch TV or in the commercial break, instead of sitting during the commercial, which is usually always the same commercial as far as
Right.
I know. I don't have TV anymore, but you know, you could get up and just use these, however long it is, 3-5 minutes, and do something,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And,
Super easy. It's one small task, one step at a time.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And so I'd love for us to kind of like switch gears and talk about a piece you mentioned earlier, the financial piece, because I really like that part of what you were kind of how you merged that with yourself in that decluttering and the finances. And I have this new in my book, my new book, I have a chapter that's all about abundance. And I'd love for you to talk about like how decluttering can affect our finances and our pocketbook, because I think that's a huge thing that people like, oh, wow, if I just decluttered, maybe I could have more money or more abundance, whatever that
Yes.
is.
Yeah, so if anything, then the money part should motivate you.
Right.
If it's not the self-love or the health part, then
Right.
maybe it's the money part. Well, yeah, a lot of people find money, so it's not uncommon that I help people declutter and all of a sudden they find money. They find gift cards that they forgot they had. They find all kinds of stuff. Sometimes they also realize that they used to have a hobby that they were really into, and now they are not into it anymore for whatever reason, maybe health reason or for whatever reason, like
Snowboarding or
but
something.
that other people would be very willing to pay something for it to get
Mhm.
it, you know. So you could list it on Craigslist or eBay or wherever,
Mhm.
Facebook Marketplace or whatever all the places are. You could get some money back. The trap there is a little bit, then people start stacking it somewhere. Oh, that's what I want to sell, and then they never do it. So that could
Right.
become another mental and physical clutter pile. So I would really suggest that you look into it and see, okay, how much time would it cost me to actually list this, and how much realistically can I get if you can only get $20 for it? Is
Right.
it really worth your time to spend maybe 2 hours to get this all up?
Right. Give it
Or
away,
to get
maybe.
$20, or wouldn't it be nicer for you as an act of love for other people that you bring it to a thrift store, to Salvation
Mhm.
Army, to people in need that could use it, and you could feel good about it. We don't always have to give money when we want to give, you know, like
Right.
how we are talking about tithing and giving 10% or however much we want to give. We don't always have to give money. There is other
Right.
ways we can give things that might be even more valuable than just getting the cash. So
Mhm.
that is one thing, how decluttering can help you. Decluttering also, like when you start declutter, your perspectives change, your the way you do things change. You may not go impulse shopping anymore, so there you start saving money too. You maybe with food, for example, I don't want to put you on the spot, but with food you probably
Mhm.
have less food that expires, so you're
Right.
also saving money because you don't have to go throw out expired food and go buy it fresh. It has it Like we could probably brainstorm 100 reasons why
Right.
it, for the finances too. And then when you want to really talk about finances, then I get on my soapbox and say most people don't even know what all gets charged onto their credit card. They have no
Right.
idea. So if
Yeah.
we would even just start looking at our credit card, and this $7 Starbucks twice a day really adds up. Not just on our hips, but it adds up,
Right.
in cash. So I help my clients, I call it elegant finances. It's
Mm,
not that we're denying ourselves the things that bring us joy, but we're actually really questioning. Again, it's this mental thing, like, do I
mm.
really need, I always bring the example with the Starbucks coffee. I mean, it could be anything, no? Like, do I really need to go buy this thing every day, or do I need to really have another pair of shoes, or another dress, or could I go shopping in my closet, for example? Is there
Right.
anything that I haven't really realized that I have it in there? And so you kind of automatically, without pushing yourself, start to spend less.
Mm,
And like I said, you might find things that give you some extra income, some extra cash, or at least make you feel good because you could help some neighbor out. Maybe the neighbor needs it, or Salvation Army could use it. And you get more a handle on your finances and on your credit card spending, because they often say too, is like, if you just have to show your card, or now we have this touchless one more and
right.
more since Corona. No, we don't even have to type in a code anymore. We
Yeah.
basically have to do nothing to spend money.
Which makes
It's
it
kind of
easy
like,
but scary.
it is scary, and we really, our brain can't keep track of whatever we're
Right.
spending. So
Mm,
it's really helpful if we're actually looking and becoming more mindful. And again, it's not about, oh, you can't have your latte, or you can't have what brings you joy. It's more like, do you really want this? And is it realistic, or does it fit in the budget, or should this money maybe go to something else that in the long term brings you more
right.
joy?
Right. More
You
joy.
know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's great. And that I love what you mentioned about the Starbucks card. It's true. I'm sure a lot of people reevaluated their going out for coffee during COVID, but I think we got our own, I don't coffee maker a couple years ago because
Mm.
I wanted to make my own coffee at home more. And it was a huge difference, and I also find it more joy providing. I'm like, okay, I can do it. It's my little morning ritual. It's super
Yeah.
fun, and so it's true. When you look at your credit card, you can totally see things. Oh, wow, I had no idea I was spending like XXXX
Yeah.
for all these different things.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
I mean, even I that come from finance, I for a while I was kind of addicted to the cold coffees from McDonald's, especially, and not McDonald's, Starbucks,
Yeah.
especially in summer, these
Right.
mochas and all that. And because I'm coming from finance, I actually look at my credit card
Right.
bill, and I'm started adding it up, and I'm like, this is crazy. I could go and have 3 fancy dinners a month, like,
Right. Yeah.
and the other thing, I really like what you said, that you have your own coffee maker, and you have this little ritual. That's another thing how I say this is self-love, because this is nurturing for yourself, and you're doing it at home, and it needs less time than driving to Starbucks and go into the line there. Like, sometimes the lines here in Canada are still around the block or whatever. So
Right.
next time you can do it at home. You can maybe do it with your spouse, or with a friend, and it's quality time, and it costs less.
Hmm.
And then when you do go to Starbucks or to wherever you go to get a fancy coffee, then it is a special thing, and you may appreciate it even more when you do
Right.
go.
Yeah, that's so true. I like to make a date with a friend once a month, and we always pick some fun, like a tea shop usually is what we do. But we'll
Yeah.
pick, something different where we can kind of rotate and support our local environment, our local community. And so we'll pick like, oh, let's go to this little small tea shop and enjoy something together. So that's kind of like how I justify, like, okay, I decluttered my coffee bank account.
Yeah.
Now I can go out with my friend and have something enjoy in the company of a friend.
And possibly spend extra money there for some other goodie, or for something,
Hmm.
some specialty item, or their specialty drink, or whatever they're having. without having to worry that it breaks the bank. No, because
Right.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so we're working on decluttering our environment. And so we've decided, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, let's say, declutter my desk, which I did right before we started, just so I
Yeah.
could have space. And so how do you like keep that declutter? How do you keep the clutter from like creeping back in? Like what is there like a habit that you have to change? Cause like say you're always like, I don't know, you come home from work and you dump everything on your kitchen counter, right? And so how do you reboot that to create a new declutter habit?
Yeah, so that's where my saying a few minutes a day keeps the chaos away comes in
Mhm.
handy too. So like it's not just about decluttering and getting to a point where you feel at home and it's good and the clutter is down, then it's
Mhm.
maintenance. And
Right.
when we're doing it a few minutes a day, we're already in the habit of doing every day a little bit. So we're just keeping it up, and we may just pivot slightly from decluttering to actually tidying and just doing putting things away. So one of the things that often happens, why especially desks
Yeah.
get cluttered, is because we don't put the things back where they belong. And then if
Right.
we ask, why don't we put the things back where they belong? Because they actually don't really have a home, because we haven't set up a system where they would have a home. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's double and triple extra hard to go put it away because you don't really know where.
Right. Where does it
So
go?
and out it goes, and we're piling it. So we're just piling it and piling it. And then people tell me as excuse, oh, I need to see it, otherwise I forget about it. And I'm like, okay, start telling me what is all in these piles. And nobody has an idea.
Right.
And yeah, so it's not just one tip solves the issue, but if it is one tip, then it is a few minutes a day keeps the chaos away. But
Yeah.
while we're decluttering, we can start creating homes for the things. So
Mm,
ideally, everything has a home so that we actually know where it would belong. And then we can start working on the habit of always putting it back where it belongs. Now, I totally understand when you come home from a busy day, you may dump it either on the kitchen counter or on the kitchen table or wherever your hotspot is. I call those hotspots.
right.
But if we're not dealing with those, then they're becoming really out of hand. And that's then when we're running around maybe at 7:30 in the morning, and we should have left the house at 7:15, but we can't find whatever we can find because it's somewhere. So we can dump these things on the counter or on the table, as long as we have a habit or a system in place that we go, and it depends how big on how many people are living in the household too. But if just let's just say it's just our stuff, depends how much you dump there,
Right.
whether you need to go and take care of it once a day, or maybe it's enough just 3 times a week, or maybe it's
Hmm.
enough once a week. It depends. No.
Right.
Another thing how you can prevent the clutter from creeping in is like, we always, especially as women, go with the same things out of the house and come back with it: handbag, wallet,
Mm-hmm.
keys, cell
Right.
phone, whatever your jam is. That's about what I have. So if we have some kind of like a lounge pad where it's easy to just put whatever we come back with just
Mm,
there,
right.
the idea is also like you always know where it is, and it's not that difficult to get us to the point to just dump it there instead of on the kitchen counter,
Yeah.
for example. So again, baby steps: dump it there, but then you always know that's where my wallet is, where my keys
Hmm.
are, where my handbag is, where my whatever else you need to get out of the house is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there is all kinds of little things, and you can brainstorm for yourself when you start thinking, okay, I come home, that's what I'm doing. Where could I most ideally, is that a word? Most ideally, ideally, from between the door you come in to the kitchen counter, somewhere in between, you have this lounge pad where you actually can
Right.
dump things. So when you go out, you can just grab it there again. And lots of these little things. So it's all about tweaking and looking. And okay, now after a week or a month, you notice, okay, this doesn't work that way. Okay, how could I make it work? Maybe the lounge pad is in the wrong spot.
Right.
Maybe I don't do the sorting of the hotspot. Then maybe I need to put a reminder in my cell phone that it dings so that I actually do it. And if it's only, like we said in the beginning, a few minutes, like anybody has 5 minutes to go and do something. With the desk, for example, just because you were talking about you cleared your desk.
Mhm.
If you take 5 minutes before you close shop for the day
Right. That's what I do.
and just put the things a little bit back where they belong, not just piling them up, but
In
back
another
where they
spot.
belong, then just imagine how you feel the next morning coming into your office when it looks
Right. Clean.
clean and inviting. That's
Mhm.
also self-love. If you come in and you see it like the messy place you left the night before, your energy is going to dip right away, and then it's going to be
Right.
so much harder than maybe we go on social media and scroll there a little bit, because like, oh my god, I don't even want to think about working.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. I totally do that. I clean my desk off, and I actually like really get a cleaner so that it's like energetically clean too. I'll do some either, saging or something where I'm cleaning the energetic environment, because I do, work with patients. So I want it to be clear for my next day. But also, like you said, if it is not clean when I come back in, I don't want to start the day. I'm like, I'll just
Exactly.
go make coffee or go get a tea or, distract myself from reality.
Exactly. And that's where I'm saying too, this is self-love, and you're sabotaging yourself by not taking these few minutes. You're
Hmm.
sabotaging yourself the next day. And then maybe you don't get everything done that you wanted to get done the next day, just because you didn't take the 5 minutes the night before and you came in and you needed to go and scroll social media or sit at the coffee maker and chit chat or
Right.
whatever, read the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. It's amazing when we create the space for ourselves to have a space to work in, how much more space we have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mental space too.
Right.
Always
Yeah.
remember,
Mental
you will have
space.
so much mental space, so much more energy, so much more motivation. You can serve your patients or clients or whoever you serve, can serve them so much better
Hmm.
from a better place.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. That's so true. Okay, Connie, as we're wrapping up today, I wanted to talk about just two more small things. I know I could talk for a long time, I think, but I wanted you to just touch base about your astrology readings, because I think that's really a really interesting part of what you do. And if you could just, mention it and talk about how they've helped you in decluttering, and then our listeners can come and find out more from your website as they move along.
Yes. Yeah. So like I said earlier, like I was always interested in astrology, and I didn't really make a connection to anything before. It was like also probably because I was hiding it away from everybody but me. But so if you go into astrology, and I'm not talking about the horoscopes you read in the newspaper, but if we're really diving into somebody's chart, we can actually see a little bit where they are energetically. Like, spoiler alert, I watched your very first episode from your podcast, so I know you're an Aries on the cusp of
That's
Pisces.
right.
You're fire and water. So I'm a Pisces, but I have a lot of planets in Aries, so I'm also fire and water. And then the other two energies or elements are air and earth. And so like if I look at a chart, I can get an idea whether that person struggles with staying on track, for example, because they're very airy and easily distracted, or
Yep.
become stuck in something because they have so much earth, they dive so deep that they're then
Mhm.
not getting out of the rabbit hole.
Right.
Or the fire people are often the ones who start the project fully energized and then crash and burn
Fizzle
after,
out. Right.
because they don't have the stamina. And the
Mhm.
Pisces, the water element, which is Pisces, Scorpio, and Cancer, those are often so emotional that they can't, if they start, so this just gives me some indication. Now, until I talk with the person, you can't just go by the chart, because they may not live their nature. There's a distinction between nature and nurture. And with nurture, I mean how you grew up. So for
Right.
example, me, I kind of touched it real quick. I was not allowed to show my wild side too much when I
Mm.
was younger. So my fire was really like under the lid. And that could happen with a lot of people. So But when I talk with them and I know their energy, I can help them better. If I know they have a lot of air and they're easily distracted, I know a little bit how to help them with tips and practices and techniques, how to not get that easily distracted. If I have somebody who has a lot of earth, I know I have to make sure they don't get lost in their stuff and they're coming back up again. So this is how it helps me. That's the one side. And then the other side is also, it helps again with self-love and self-worth, because if you learn and hear with what imprint you kind of came into this world, you become way more compassionate for yourself. Like when you know you have a lot of fire and you have a lot of water, and I don't know how you experience that, but I'm either high on fire or I'm drowning in water.
Right.
And beat ourselves up all we want, but that's how we came in. And you become so way more compassionate. So the less mental clutter happens. We're the less beating up. So we're just like, oh, okay, I'm doing the fire thing. Okay, well, it will probably come down again and I'll get back to normal.
Right. Yeah, I'll douse
away
myself.
From the volcano,
Yeah, I do have both of those tendencies, as probably the people that know me listening in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you just understand, and you don't beat yourself up, and you're not sabotaging yourself with beating yourself up. You're saying, oh, okay, I'm doing this. Okay. And then over time, you will create some rituals or have some ideas or practices what you can do to get yourself, either if you're in the crazy fire, how you can get yourself back to a normal level, or if you're drowning in your water and you're so emotional, how you get yourself out of there. And again, it helps with self-love. So and it helps yourself to understand that just because your best friend decluttered by this and this method, that this doesn't necessarily work for you, because she might be earth and you are maybe more fire, or you're more air, and that's why it's not working. So that's the short explanation how astrology helps me with my clients, and how it helps me with myself too, to be more compassionate with my fire and water contradiction thingy.
Yeah, that's great, Connie, because it gives a really good perspective about how the elements affect us with astrology, but also, just everything around us. And it's so true. I mean, like you said, I'm a cusper, and I do have that like tendency to like blow up, whether that's a good thing, with lots of energy, and then sometimes I'll fizzle out a little bit. But what I wanted to also touch base on was like that nurturing part that you said, because then when I know what that is and I can nurture that part of myself, I'm like, okay, I really need to just take a break and go into water or just relax by the river. And that recharges me 100%. So I think, when we know what that sign is, what sign we are, whether that's fire, water, earth, when we go to that element, it can help us to recharge the system.
Yeah, and I want to say it's not just the sun sign. So most people know what they are for the sun sign. So you're Aries, but almost Pisces, no? You were almost Pisces and you ended up in Aries. I'm a full Pisces. I'm born beginning of March. But we not only have the sun in our chart, so we have 10 planets in our chart, and we have some angles in our chart that have also meaning. You may have heard of the rising sign or the ascendant. So that has a big part in it too. And then we have, like, we don't want to go too deep into it, but then there is houses too. That means like how we show up in certain areas of our life. And if certain planets go into there could be the element of water could come more from there, like, or earth. So when you know how or which element you're struggling more with and which one you may have even too much, you can just balance it out better for yourself. And again, you have this compassion and more self-love for yourself, and you know what to do when you're flying off the handle because you have too much fire, or you're ending up crying when you don't want to cry because you're drowning in water,
Right. Yeah, that's great. I love that little wrap up there, because that's perfect. We're not just like one sign, like you said. We're a multifaceted sign being.
Yes.
Yeah. So how can people find you, Connie? How can they find out more about what you're doing, get some help with their decluttering? And I think you have a free ebook that I don't know if it's free. You have an ebook that I'd love for you to talk about and how people can find you on social media.
Yeah. So my website is connygraf.com, and I write Conny with a Y. So it's CONNYGRAF.com. And from there, you actually find everything. I have a podcast that is called From Chaos to Peace with Conny, where I talk. I have solo episodes and guests where we talk a lot about mental and emotional clutter, but I also talk about like how to clear physical clutter, how to approach clutter, how to start decluttering. So you can go and check that out. And on social media, I'm on Instagram under I am Conny Graf. In Facebook, I am Facebook/Chaos to Peace. And the book you mentioned, yeah, I co-wrote a book 3 years ago with a friend. It's an ebook. It's not free, but it's under $10. What I do have for free is there is a checklist or a PDF that you can download how to keep your desk clean or clear, how to organize it. And that's where the permaculture comes in, because I have then zones, and I talk all about how zones help us keep the place or the desk or the whole office actually clean. And I have another free a PDF that people can download, because I notice a lot of people, especially women, which is the majority of my audience, they struggle with clothes. So I have one how to go into your closet without getting completely overwhelmed and declutter your closet.
Great. Those are great ones.
You can find all these things on my website.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So that's connygraf.com. And I'll put all of those in the show notes so listeners can tune in and find out and where to find you. So one last question as we wrap up today. If you had an unlimited budget, what would you do to make the biggest impact on the planet right now?
Oh, an unlimited budget.
Unlimited.
Oh,
yes.
God. Usually I get $1 million or 10. Now I have an unlimited budget.
Unlimited.
Well, unlimited. I would make sure everybody has something to eat, has clean water to drink, roof over their head.
Yeah. That should be a given, right? I think that
should be a given.
Yeah,
exactly. And that's the only time I accept the word should.
Right.
But that really should be a given.
Yeah.
That we all have food, water, and shelter.
Yeah.
And it's so sad that so many people don't.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a great one. And we will make sure that happens because we need to make that happen around the planet. Well, thank you, Conny, again for joining us today. It's been a joy to have you on the Genetic Genius podcast. And I think we might have to have you back again to talk about astrology in a longer discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Lulu. It was really a pleasure. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about it. So
that's great.
Shut me up.
That's right. Yes, your passion oozes out of you, which is wonderful. We loved it. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.